Welcome back. We're going to go through the Life Relaunch sessions. I'm not going to go into any detail regarding the content, as you're going to find that in the session manual. I want to go over the sessions and comment on some of the objectives for each session and how they can be presented. You've probably experienced God in many ways. Scripture tells us that Jesus is the exact representation of the Father. We encounter Jesus very differently at different times in our life, or even during specific circumstances. In the same way, we want to present Jesus a little differently in each of the Life Relaunch sessions. That has implications for us as facilitators, and I'll touch on those also. Let's start with the welcome. This is actually a very important time in the Life Relaunch experience. The song we use for the welcome is by Big Daddy Weave. It's called Welcome. You can either play that song before the actual welcoming comments, or you can play the song following the welcoming comments and before you begin session one. We've done it both ways and found that it's effective either way. Most of the men have arrived not knowing what to expect. Some may be a little anxious. It's important that we put them at ease as quickly as possible. Start on time. Be friendly. Be casual and be encouraging. You want to raise their expectations by telling them that this is going to be a great experience for them. Typically, a Life Relaunch experience has 8 to 12 participants. Ask each man to introduce himself. We recommend that they give their name, where they're from, and whether they have a family. You can ask them to tell the group if they are currently married and how many kids they have. If you let the men talk too much, someone will use the introduction session as a platform to tell his entire life story. Don't let them do that. If you ask men what they do or what they did for a living, you may inadvertently cause some men to compare themselves to others. That's not healthy. So you want to avoid that. Keep it simple, make it friendly, and don't spend too much time on introductions. If you have a large group, it may not be possible to have each man introduce himself. That's fine. You can still get the men to participate by asking a few questions. How many of you were invited by a friend? How many of you have children? How many of you guys are currently married? It's simple, but it gets the men engaged. Then we introduce the team in the same way. Have each facilitator give his name, where he lives, if he has a family. That's it. They'll get to know each facilitator over the course of the day. The script in the session manual covers virtually everything you need to say. You may have to modify something based upon the group or your location, but it should work pretty well as you see it in the manual. Be sure to mention the movie clips. Every so often you will encounter a man who takes offense at the language in some of the clips. Tell him you understand his concern, but we believe it's important in order to make the point contained in each clip. Very few men will object. That includes the pastors who have gone through Life Relaunch. Once you've completed the welcome, immediately begin the video for the first session, the spiritual battle and the heart of a warrior. Each session includes key points. Some of the facilitators tell the participants the key points at the beginning of the session. That's okay. However, you don't have to do this. The choice is yours. The spiritual battle may hit the men very hard. They will see that they're in a battle and that the battle is serious. That may be news to them. They also need to see that Jesus is a warrior. That also may be news to them. Finally, they need to understand that Jesus is calling them personally to battle. This is not a session to be gentle. This session should be presented forcefully and seriously. As with all the sessions, there's an opportunity for the facilitator to tell some of his own story. He may tell of a time when he was attacked by the enemy. The purpose of any personal story is to reinforce the fact that the battle is serious. Many of the things that have happened to all of us are a result of the enemy trying to kill, steal, or destroy. The men need to understand the battle and that it affects everyone. We also introduce the subject of the spiritual heart and that the heart is the target of the enemy. As we complete this session, we ask the men to give Jesus permission to heal their hearts. This is an important prayer. This session and this prayer set the tone for the rest of the day. The next session, Knowing Our Enemy, continues the theme of the spiritual battle by introducing our enemy and the strategies that he uses against us. The men need to understand that the battle in the unseen realm is very real. They will see that the key elements include the assaults, the direct attacks that the enemy uses to get us to make agreements with him, and how those agreements affect our lives. The tone of this session should be very much like the first. This is serious business. As a facilitator, you may share with the men some of the assaults and attacks on your own life, where you agreed with the lies of the enemy. It's important that the participants see that we walk the same path that they've walked. We've all been assaulted or attacked, and we've all made agreements. Your honesty and transparency here are extremely important. Toward the end of this session, you'll hand out the restoration guide. Tell them that this is the guide that they will use for most of the exercises. Remind them that this guide will only be seen by one other man. This is their private, personal guide. There are 2 exercises at the end of this session. The first is straightforward. The men identify the agreements they've made with the enemy. The second exercise begins to get a bit more personal. This is the exercise where the men check the sin issues and behavior patterns they have seen in their family, most often in their fathers, grandfathers, or brothers. As they go through the exercise, checking the boxes, tell them that if they're not sure that it's a pattern, but they've seen it once or twice and they struggle with it also, check the box. By the time the men complete this session, they understand that the life relaunch experience isn't like Sunday school. The third session is called The Nature of the Conflict. We're beginning to get a bit more personal. In this session, we explore how the battle has impacted them personally. We introduce that the battle is in their mind, that the target is their spiritual heart, that the enemy attacks their identity and where he's been successful. The men will begin to better understand their personal behavior patterns and possible addictions. This is another opportunity for the facilitator to share his own sin issues or his past destructive behavior. Don't hesitate to put yourself in the picture. This transparency is critical if the men are going to be transparent with us. The tone of this session is less forceful than the first 2. You're inviting men to take an honest look at their own lives. In this session, we also introduce the reality that God has not left us. We're not helpless. There is hope. There is a way out. There are several exercises at the end of this session. The facilitator should be careful to finish the presentation early enough to allow time for the men to complete the exercises. Most of them are pretty straightforward. You may have to coach the men with some examples of the vows they have made. A couple suggestions like, I'm never going to trust anybody again, should be sufficient to get their wheels turning. We typically break for lunch after session 3. Try not to continue talking about the sessions while you're eating lunch. If the men want to, that's okay, but it's also okay to let the men talk about sports, their families, hobbies, their vacations, anything. They need a bit of a break from the material. After lunch, it gets more personal. We begin the session entitled The False Self and the Poser. This session focuses in on our identity. We talk about every man needing to know who he is and that he has what it takes to be a man. We introduce the fact that most men have created a false identity. They hide behind it and they present it to the world. It's false, it's fake. Sometimes we don't even know that we do it. This session includes a video clip from Good Will Hunting that helps the men to clearly recognize what it means to pose. In this session, Jesus comes with truth, but with no condemnation. It's like he's asking us, can you see this? Do you recognize it? The facilitator also has an opportunity to share how he has presented a false identity to the world. We're encouraging the men to go a little deeper and to look at themselves more objectively. We need to be encouraging without disparaging them in any way, because we're all in the same place. The exercise here doesn't take very long. Most men will recognize how they pose. They just need a sentence or 2 to complete the exercise. The next session, the wound, is a tough one. We're inviting the men to go into painful places in their past. This session focuses a lot on the father wound. But for many men, a wound received from their mother or brother or someone else can be equally significant, equally damaging. I believe that Jesus is very gentle, very tender in revealing our wounds. We need to be also. Jesus may begin to touch emotions that have been buried for a long time. All of the facilitators, not just the presenter, should be very sensitive to the men through this session. The guys will begin to understand why they do what they do and why they are the way they are. It's like pulling back the curtain and revealing deep and perhaps hidden places. The facilitator presenting this session needs to be prepared to share some of his own wounds. Where did they come from? Who wounded him? What was the effect of that wound emotionally or on his relationships? Jesus does not reveal anything that he is not prepared to heal. This session includes a clear statement of hope. Jesus is prepared to heal deep wounds. Again, we need to be encouraging, sensitive, and tender during this session. The agenda includes a break after this session. The men need it. I encourage you to discuss the sessions with your team leader or other facilitators. Additionally, begin to think about what personal information you will share as you present each of these sessions. You want to be very focused in what you choose to share. As you insert your life into the story, into these sessions, try to keep each one of these about 2 to 3 minutes. The balance of the first day of the Life Relaunch experiences focuses on telling your story. We'll take that up in the next video.